The rain started falling harder as I walked home from work that Thursday night. Dark clouds swallowed the last traces of daylight above the quiet neighborhood. I pulled my yellow raincoat tighter around my body, feeling the cold water seeping through the fabric at my shoulders. The empty street stretched ahead of me, lined with modest houses and parked cars being battered by the downpour. I quickened my pace, my black rubber boots splashing through the growing puddles on the cracked sidewalk. The streetlights above me flickered weakly, casting unstable orange reflections across the wet asphalt. I could hear the storm drains working overtime, gurgling and churning as they struggled to swallow the flood of rainwater rushing along the curbs. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance, and I lowered my head against the wind. That's when a sound stopped me completely. A desperate, high-pitched cry cutting through the relentless noise of the rain. I turned slowly, scanning the flooded street around me. The sound seemed to come from ground level, near the corner where the water was flowing fastest. I walked toward it carefully, my boots now submerged in ankle-deep water that pulled at my every step. The desperate cries grew louder as I approached the storm drain at the edge of the sidewalk. That's when I saw him, a medium-sized caramel-colored stray dog, his thin body half trapped inside the storm drain opening. The old metal grate had partially collapsed inward under the weight of debris and rust, and the bent iron bars were pinning the dog's hind legs beneath the surface of the dark rising water. His front paws scratched desperately against the wet concrete edge, claws scraping uselessly as he tried to pull himself free. I rushed closer and dropped to my knees on the flooded sidewalk, cold water instantly soaking through my jeans up to my thighs. The dog's brown eyes locked onto mine through the curtain of rain, and he stopped struggling for a moment. He just stared at me with an expression of pure exhaustion and fear, his chest heaving with rapid, panicked breaths. His wet caramel fur was plastered flat against his body, revealing the outline of every rib beneath his skin. This dog had been starving long before the storm trapped him here. The murky floodwater rushed past his trembling frame, and I watched in horror as the water level climbed higher, now reaching the middle of his narrow chest and rising faster with each passing second. I reached down and grabbed the bent metal bars with both hands, pulling with all my strength. The rusted iron groaned but didn't move. Grate was too heavy, too damaged, wedged at an angle that made it impossible to lift alone. My fingers slipped on the wet metal, and I fell backward into the flooded street, rain pelting my face. The dog whimpered loudly, his front paws scratching faster now as the water reached his shoulders. His brown eyes never left mine, silently screaming for help. I looked around the empty street desperately. No cars, no people, no lights in any windows. The storm had driven everyone inside, and this dog and I were completely alone. Time was running out and I had no idea what to do next. I scrambled back to my feet, water dripping from every part of my body, my mind racing for a solution. Then I remembered. My car was parked just 2 blocks away, and in the trunk I always kept a small emergency kit with basic tools. I looked at the dog one more time, his brown eyes following my every move, and I held up my hand as if to tell him to wait. Then I turned and ran. My boots pounded through the flooded street, water splashing with every desperate stride. The rain seemed to fall even harder now, blurring my vision as I sprinted past dark houses and parked cars. My lungs burned, but I didn't slow down. Every second I wasted was another second that dog spent drowning. I reached my car and threw open the trunk with shaking hands. Inside, I found what I needed: a heavy tire iron and a pair of thick work gloves. I grabbed both and slammed the trunk shut, already running back toward the storm drain. The return trip felt twice as long, my legs heavy with exhaustion and fear. When I reached the drain again, my heart nearly stopped. The water had risen to the dog's neck. His head was tilted back at a sharp angle, his nose barely above the surface, gasping for air. The dog's front paws had stopped moving completely. His body floated limply in the rising water, only his nose and eyes visible above the dark surface. I could see him struggling to keep his head tilted back, every muscle trembling with the effort of staying alive for just one more breath. His brown eyes were locked on mine, and in them I saw something that broke me. He was starting to give up. I pulled on the work gloves and dropped to my knees in the rushing water beside the drain. I shoved the tire iron deep beneath the bent metal bars, wedging it at the strongest angle I could find. Then I grabbed the end of the iron with both hands and pushed down with everything I had. All my weight, all my strength, all my desperation. The rusted metal groaned and screamed against the leverage. My arms shook violently. My boots slipped on the underwater concrete, but I caught myself and pushed even harder. I could hear the dog choking behind me, water splashing into his mouth and nose. I screamed without sound, teeth clenched, veins bursting in my neck and forehead. And then, a loud metallic crack. The bent bars shifted upward, just enough to create a gap beneath the water. I dropped the tire iron and plunged both hands into the dark flood, grabbing blindly until I felt the dog's thin hind legs. I stood up slowly, the dog cradled in my arms like a child. His small body was shaking uncontrollably against my chest, but his eyes were open now, looking up at me. The rain still poured down around us, but it didn't matter anymore. I had him. He was alive. I carried him through the flooded streets back toward my car parked 2 blocks away. His wet head rested against my shoulder, his breathing slowly becoming steadier with each step I took. By the time I reached the car, his shaking had begun to calm. I opened the back door and gently laid him down on the seat, wrapping him in an old blanket I kept in the trunk. I drove through the storm to the nearest emergency veterinary clinic, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure he was still breathing. The dog lay motionless on the back seat, but his eyes followed my reflection in the mirror. He was watching me, trusting me completely. At the clinic, the veterinarians took him immediately. I waited for hours in the lobby, still soaking wet, still wearing my yellow raincoat. When the doctor finally came out, she was smiling. The dog was severely malnourished and hypothermic, but he would survive. He would make a full recovery. 3 weeks later, I returned to the clinic to pick him up. The dog that walked out to meet me looked nothing like the skeleton I had pulled from the drain. He walked straight to me and pressed his head against my leg. I knelt down and held him again, and this time he wasn't shaking. He was home.